Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Management Mentors webinar on overcoming the stress of giving feedback. What I'll do is we'll get straight into it and introduce our Head of Human Development and Coaching, Lindley. So, Lindley, over to you.
Fantastic, Neil. Thank you very much. I did get a couple of emails this morning about people not being able to make the live call because of things coming up at the last minute. So thank you very much for those of you who are going to be listening to this on recording as well. Now, me, Lindley Craig, I am, as Neil said, the head of human development and coaching for the Management Mentors. And one of the things that I focus on with leaders, specifically currently, is communication, as well as the concept of mental programs that are causing issues for themselves. And those issues might be coming to them from a perspective of, i.e. somebody else has told them that they have issues and they need to fix them because they don't know how to do that. And sometimes that is them actually understanding that they're having struggles in their leadership role, and they want to understand how they can fix them. And so for me, it's finding what exactly the mental programs and the things that are happening for them, and then teaching them some skill sets on how to do it differently. Now, one of the things that I have found recently is that there's a lot of struggling going on with giving feedback to team members. And this can be management giving feedback to team members that they have, or leaders giving feedback to senior leaders of their organization. And so one of the things that I did for the Management Mentors was kind of give the top 10 of the reasons or the mistakes that people make when giving feedback to others. Now, with this feedback, the ones at the top are the sort of the least important as far as giving the mistakes people make. So no documentation. It's really important, especially for lawyers, because of the fact that when it comes to a management kinds of situation, such as somebody wanting to take you to court, or somebody wanting to dispute something, well, that is a situation where documentation is really going to be helpful. So there's a couple of these mistakes, though, that actually, when people make these mistakes, they have a certain memory of that mistake that they've made as a manager or as a leader over an organization. And then that causes them to have stress later on when they need to give feedback again. So things will happen. For example, the one about giving all of the feedback to a person at once, everything all at once. That particular one is a mistake that is kind of really bad from a stress perspective, because when we're giving feedback to somebody and we're telling them all of the things that we have in our list of things that they're doing wrong, or behaviors that we want to change, the person feels quite attacked by it, and it's sort of like every single point is like a shot to them, and so they feel quite attacked. And depending on their personality will depend on how they respond to that. So some people are going to get quite defensive about it, but the reaction that they're going to have is going to be argumentative. And so they're going to push back, and they're going to fight that those statements that you're making. And so that's going to be quite a stressful environment to be in when you're trying to give corrective feedback to somebody and they're actually rejecting it. And not only are they rejecting it, they're actually doing so in quite an aggressive way. Now, another way that somebody can come across that all at once type of feedback is they can get quite upset about it. So they take it as a personal offense. And so typically what's going to happen is they're going to either start crying or they're going to get quite emotional about it. And for a lot of leaders or managers, that's quite hard to deal with. And you know, they get into a situation that's like, now what do I do? And if they remember that situation, then the next time that they're trying to give feedback, they're going to fear that particular response again. And another way that a person can respond, depending, of course, on their personality, is when they get that feedback from their manager and it comes all at once and there's lots of things coming at them, they can also shut down. And then the manager is in a situation where they don't know what to do because the person isn't necessarily responding at all. And so that they sort of cave in and shut down, and they don't really have any communication. And for a manager, that's also really hard because they don't know if that person is really heard them or if they're going to take action on any of those things. So that becomes quite a big issue. Now, another one of the things that I see often in corrective feedback, and a mistake that people make in corrective feedback, is judging the situation before they ever walk in. And when this happens, they've sort of already created a picture in their head of what that situation is about and all of the facts, and they'll go in and they'll present it as very factually based, and they come across as already made up their mind and already sort of judged the situation and made up their mind as to what the situation is all about. And what happens for an employee who has that happen is that they feel very sort of already tried and found guilty of those things. And they often find that it's unfair, or that the person that they're not being heard, because that it doesn't matter what they say, that the jury's already out. And that's really hard for employees. And again, they might have that same sort of reaction depending on their personality. They might fight against it, they might sort of flee against it, or they might actually just cave in. And it's these kinds of mistakes that bring out this problem that we have with stress in overcoming feedback, because of the fact that when a manager does that, he remembers or she remembers those events, and then that is the frame that they put in their mind before doing the next type of feedback. And it's important to understand that most people don't learn how to do these kinds of things as they're growing up. They don't necessarily have great models in their life, being their parents or teachers or other things, of how to give advice or to give feedback to somebody in a way that that person is going to accept it, and not only accept it, but be empowered by it and take ownership of it, and then change their behavior ultimately, because that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for that person to correct whatever it is that we're talking about. And that's really important. Now, the last one on this list is the doesn't communicate clearly, which is the top reason that I see, or the top mistake that I see, that when a manager or a leader is giving feedback to somebody, the feedback is often so vague or is directed in a particular way that the person doesn't understand. So I was working with a leader who was giving feedback to somebody, and the feedback was that what the person was doing wasn't aligned with the corporate values or the corporate goals. And I said, what does that mean specifically? What does that mean? So what behavior is the person doing, and how does it not align? Because when that person was hearing the statement, they didn't understand what it meant either. And they know the goals, they know the values, they don't understand how what they're doing doesn't align with those things. And so that's one of the things that we want to be very careful of, is having feedback that's too vague and that the person doesn't understand. Oftentimes I hear stories about managers or leaders who give feedback to people, and then the person goes away and does almost exactly the opposite thing that they're asking the person to change. And this is often due to miscommunication. And it's when you look at how communication occurs and all of the mental programs that communication has to get through to be able to overcome miscommunication, it's a miracle that we actually can communicate something properly. So having the skill set to be able to do it properly and give it to that person in a way that they understand it and they take ownership of it and empowered by it and will change their behavior. That's the really important thing. Now, when we talk about stress of giving feedback, it's important to understand what we mean by that specifically. So when we look at stress and what stress is, it's obviously a feeling that we have in our body, but it's actually a bit more than that. What we know from basic neuroscience is that stress actually is produced in the brain. It has a neurochemical composure to it. So neurochemicals such as cortisol and norepinephrine, or what we would refer to as adrenaline, those kinds of neurochemicals are going to be going on in the body as a part of the stress response. And then we have physiology that also goes with the stress response. So for example, you can see this image on this slide. And when we see this person, we don't actually have to have that person communicate with us at all. Just by this person's physiology, we can see stress. And that's important to understand because we often also have a stressful physiology, and that will cause people to feel that we're stressed, even though that we might not think we're stressed ourselves. So people who have chronic stress don't often recognize the fact that they are under stress, but other people can see it. Now, the other thing about our sort of the neurochemistry of stress is that we also know that it's different for different people. So when we take one set of challenges and we apply it to one type of personality or one type of person, that person has a different chemical response to that challenge than other people would. And we talk about resiliency as that ability to be able to handle more and more types of challenges, more different types of challenges and higher level types of challenges with an ability to bounce back. It's not as if the neurochemicals don't happen. It's just that our ability to bounce back from that neurochemical reaction is faster. And so that's what we call resiliency. And for those people who are going on and taking that stress, and then it takes a very long time for them to get over that stress, and it's more chronic stress, then those people are the ones who are going to have those neurochemical reactions in their body much longer. And we also know that when you have those neurochemical reactions in your body for a longer time, we know that that's extremely bad for your health. So there's a book out. I don't know if it's still out on Amazon, but it was a book that had the title "Dead Executives Don't Get Bonuses," and it's about that understanding that your health is extremely important, and stress over a period of time can actually damage that. Now, when we're giving feedback to people as in a situation where we're feeling stress from that, we have to understand that it can happen because of the mistakes that we've made in the past and we've had a reaction. We also have the opportunity for some people and some people's personality that they see giving feedback as conflict. And their personality doesn't like conflict, and so they don't want to give feedback because they are fearing that conflict is going to be there. And that's a very specific type of personality that does that. And it's important for that person to be able to understand ways of being able to communicate with people where they don't feel that it's going to be a conflict situation. And there's some really cool ways that we have of being able to teach people how not to do that. This is going to be conflict. I was working with somebody just recently, and they were going to have a communication with somebody that was higher in their organization than they were. And with that communication, what they were going to be saying to that person was some feedback that wasn't necessarily great. But it was important for that person to be able to say those things, to be able to improve the relationship between them and the other person, the senior person in their organization. And when that person is, when she's making that communication to her boss, her initial reaction is this is going to be conflict. This is something to have anxiety about. And one quick technique that I had talked to her about was, yes, that's an absolute possibility. What are other possibilities? And she never thought about what other possibility could happen other than the one that she was sort of fixated on, that the person was going to argue back, and argue the points back to her. And so what she decided to do, while we were going this, is think about all of the different possibilities. So we listed all of the different possibilities that it could occur during that particular meeting. And then I just asked her a simple question, which was, which one makes you feel better? And so some of them are going to be neutral. So it's a neutral feeling when we think of that possibility. Some of them are going to make us feel bad, like the person arguing back with us. That's going to make us feel bad. We're going to have anxiety about or stress about that argument. And so which would we rather choose? The one that makes us feel neutral or positive versus the one that makes us feel negative or stressed out? So making those simple choices and thinking about different possibilities, because all of them are plausible and all of them are realistic. It's just that our brain is trained to choose the one that we are going to try to avoid. That's our brain's negativity bias. It just happens. And so we want to train the brain to do other things rather than just the negativity bias. It will do that automatically. So other things that people do that don't work very well and give that stress is they imagine all of the things that could go wrong. So just like in my last example, but they take it to another degree. So they think about the person crying, they think about the person arguing with them, they think about the person walking out of the room, they think about the person sort of collapsing in their chair. And typically when somebody starts doing this, they start making them bigger and bigger. In fact, they often make them bigger and bigger outside of the norm of realism, that somebody wouldn't normally react in that type of way. And so they make it bigger than it really is. And that's sometimes an issue with some types of personality. Another thing that gives people stress is they rehearse the failure on their own part, not necessarily what the other person's going to do, but the failure on their own part rather than the success. So they're trying to give the feedback, and what they imagine themselves doing is they imagine themselves fumbling through the feedback. They imagine themselves giving incorrect, saying things incorrectly. They imagine themselves getting flustered or potentially sweating. So I worked with a gentleman in a multinational organization. And when he was delivering messages basically to their global CEO, he would turn bright red and he would sweat and he would not be able to speak at all. And when he had this first reaction, of course, when he imagined having a conversation with the CEO that the second time or the third time or the fourth time, he just imagined this thing replaying over and over again. And so he was rehearsing that failure rather than rehearsing his success. And he forgot what success looked like in that particular situation. Now we know that rehearsal and thinking about how we're going to do something is very important, because this is what professional athletes do. So they will rehearse their actual performance in their mind. And this actually came from NASA when they were having astronauts to rehearse the entire program of what they were doing, and they had them rehearse it in their mind. So it became a habit. It became something that was so easy for them to do. So most people who have stress when they give feedback, what they're rehearsing is actually the wrong stuff. They're rehearsing stuff that's going to make it worse rather than make it really good. And of course, if you do that over and over, you're creating this habit for yourself of doing it in the wrong way. And so we want to obviously do it differently. We want to rehearse it the way that we want it to go rather than the way we don't want it to go. Now, another thing that happens that causes people to have stress is they don't prepare for different types of scenarios of what could happen. And so again, it's if somebody became argumentative, what could you do, or what are you going to do if somebody was to be argumentative when you're trying to give feedback? And that's a very simple and easy process when you think through it, when you think through your own strategy. What would happen if somebody would start crying? How would you handle that in that situation? So for me, when I'm working with people and I'm teaching them how to work with different types of emotions that happen in the corrective feedback, I want them to be very neutral in those circumstances. And I want them to never forget what their outcome is. So just because there's argumentation or crying or somebody sort of retreating into themselves and not speaking at all, that doesn't mean the outcome has changed. We still have our outcome, and we have different ways of dealing with those kinds of emotions so that we can get that person back engaged into the conversation. And there's different techniques for different things. So we want people to be able to be prepared for each of those different scenarios. Now, the last one, of course, is that the person doesn't manage their own state. And this is quite interesting because a lot of people don't know about managing states. And it's something, of course, that I teach quite often is our ability to understand what a state is. So a state is a way of being at any given moment. And our state has to do with our emotions and our thoughts, as well as our physiology. And what we want to be making sure of is that we're going into a situation at least in a neutral state or potentially in a positive state. We want to feel resourceful, and we want to feel in a way that is going to give us the best ability to get across the feedback that we want to give. Now, the easiest and simplest way to do this is to change your breathing. and it sounds sort of very basic, but it's extremely important. Most people don't realize that when they're going into a situation and there's sort of anticipation or potentially a dread in their mind about having a corrective feedback, that they're going to be in a situation where they often stop breathing completely. Well, not like forever, but obviously, but they're going to stop breathing in a way that their breathing stops potentially for 30 seconds or even more. And they don't realize that that actually is going to affect the way their brain works. Most people don't realize that the heart and the brain, when they send feedback back and forth to each other, that most of the information is actually sent from the heart to the brain, not the other way around. And that's important to know because your heart is beating at a particular beat, has a particular blood pressure that goes along with it. And all of this information is going to be sent up to your brain. And your brain is going to be able to do stuff depending on whether that's a good beat or a good heart rhythm or not. So we call this heart rate variability. And so when you're in a coherent state of heart rate variability, then the information that's going up to your brain gets placed in the right location in your brain. And when your heart rate variability is incoherent, it's sort of jagged and not in a good pattern, basically what happens is that the information is being sent up and instead of going to the right places, excuse me, it's going to the amygdala. And the amygdala, if you know, is most often known as the emotional center of the brain, the fight or flight area. But it also has to do with lots of other different things that we have as far as brain function goes. So when we're in an incoherent state and we're sending that information up to our brain in an incoherent way, then the amygdala takes over, which is going to produce more likely a stressful situation for you rather than when you're in a nice coherent state. So how do you get into a coherent state? Well, this requires me to give you a little bit more neuroscience, if I may. So this is, we have an autonomic nervous system. That's what is beating our heart and making our blood pump through our body, this autonomic nervous system. It's automatic. And this autonomic nervous system has two branches. So parasympathetic branch and the sympathetic branch. Now the sympathetic branch is in charge of our get up and go. And it's part of that cortisol and norepinephrine, adrenaline. That's that side. And if you think about when you're driving a car, it's the gas pedal on your car. And then we have the parasympathetic, and that's the calming function of the brain, like the brake of your car. And that's the calming function. And so that gives us sort of DHEA and other great neurochemicals in our brain that are calming and put us in a state of ease. So those are the two branches of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, two branches of the autonomic nervous system. What they need to be doing is they need to be working in a state that allows them to go back and forth from each other. So giving you some get up and go, as well as giving you some calming. So we want them kind of working very nicely in tandem. And that's what gives us coherence. So how do you do this from a breathing perspective? Well, when we inhale, we are actually activating our sympathetic nervous system. And when we exhale, we are activating our parasympathetic nervous system. So the simplest way for you to be able to get yourself into a state of calm is by making sure that your inhales and your exhales are timed in equal amounts. So you inhale for 5 seconds and you exhale for 5 seconds. And you keep doing that, inhaling for 5 seconds and exhaling for 5 seconds. And this helps to create a balance between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. Now, another way that you can do it that is just as effective and actually a little bit quicker is what we call a physiological sigh. So a physiological sigh sounds something like this. So I will demonstrate. I'll first say what it is, and then I'm going to demonstrate what it sounds like. And I'll be breathing a little bit heavier than normal because I want you to be able to hear it. So the physiological sigh is basically inhale. And when we're at the end of the inhale, we're just going to inhale just a little bit more at sort of the top of the inhale. And then we're going to exhale. And we're going to exhale as deeply and as much as we can. So a physiological sigh sounds like this. So I'm going to inhale. So I don't have to breathe out of my mouth. I'm just doing that for the effect of this particular call so you can sort of hear it a little better. So again, I'm going to do that again just as a demonstration. So I'll inhale, and then I'll sneak an inhale at the very end of the first inhale, and then I'll exhale. And that's what we call a physiological sigh. And if you ever have a device, so I have a device that will actually show you that this is putting your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system into alignment, into a state of coherence. And I know that once I'm in that state of coherence, then my communication and the way that my brain operates is going to be way better than if it is in a jagged state. So I want you to think about the jagged state as you getting in a car with somebody and they accelerate. First they have their feet on both the accelerator and the brake. And so they accelerate and then they brake. And then they accelerate and they brake. And they accelerate and they brake. And so it's quite a jagged feeling, like you keep moving forward and moving back and moving forward. And that's the feeling of what that incoherence would be like. And it's really important to understand that obviously is not good for your car, and it's not good for you as well. And we want to make sure that you can do that through that physiological sigh or doing deep breaths, 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. Now, the physiological sigh is faster. You can do it up to like 5 times, and you can very quickly put your self into a state. The thing is most of the time, like during an actual conversation with somebody, you probably aren't going to breathe like that. So it's important to have the other one where you're going to breathe in for 5 seconds and breathe out for 5 seconds. And that's important for you to do a check for yourself that you're keeping in that nice coherent state so that the stress signals don't overwhelm you. because you have this nice coherent place going on. Super important. Now, we're in this place where, so you have a physiological sigh. Oh, one other thing about physiological sigh, this is something that we actually naturally do when we're upset. And I don't know if you've ever seen somebody, it might be a child of yours, or somebody that you might have remembered you doing this yourself at some point in time, is when people cry, they will do a physiological sigh when their system is sort of done with the crying. So they kind of know that the crying part is over, and so they'll do that physiological sigh. They'll be like, and they'll go. So that's the physiological sigh. Now, strangely enough, your body does that apparently every 5 minutes by itself. It kind of resets itself. It's not obviously that dramatic, but it is a mechanism within the body that tries to maintain that coherence between your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's really important for us to do. So these are all of the things from a stress perspective when we're giving feedback that we need to understand. We want to maintain our state by utilizing our breath. Now, there's other ways that we can maintain our state as well, but the breath is the easiest and fastest way that we can access that. And obviously, what's going on in our mind before and during that particular situation of giving that feedback, that corrective feedback to somebody, that's really going to have a lot to do with our state of being as well. Remember, I told you that our thoughts, our emotions, and our physiology all have to do with how we have our state. So when we come to physiology, we obviously, when we're in that particular communication with somebody, we want to be in a relaxed state. We don't want to be leaning back so far that it seems like the corrective feedback is not important to us. So we don't like kind of laid back. We don't want to do that. We also don't want to be too forward that we come across as being really aggressive. So one of the people that I'm working with, when she was giving corrective feedback to one of her team members, the team member, the immediate reaction that the team member had from the first corrective feedback statement that she was making was, "You look frustrated." And it threw her off. She wasn't expecting somebody to say this to her. But the comment was, "You look frustrated." And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid your physiology showing your stress or your frustration or your temperament in any way whatsoever, because it can change the communication with you and the team member that you're working with. Super important. All right. There's a couple of things that I do want to share with you that the Management Mentors has coming up, that if you're interested in, it would be really great if you can take a look at our website and see what we have going on. Because of all of the interest in the corrective feedback, giving corrective feedback, we actually had quite, I think it was 260 people who were very interested in this particular conversation. We decided to just do a single workshop just on how to do corrective feedback. And this is what it would look like. So it's a one-day workshop, and it obviously we will have lunch with a one-day workshop, and we'll go through sort of 4 stages of what I teach people with when giving feedback to others. So first, obviously, the state of mind. We've talked about that a little bit, and so I'm going to give them a couple more pieces of information of how to maintain that state for themselves, and then how to do different have different states for different reactions of the people they're giving feedback to, so that they can always be in at least a neutral state during a conversation. Then we want to understand about checking facts and knowing the outcome. So this is all part of stage 1. And that's all gives us a preparation before we even have the communication with the person. So stage 2 is all about that communication and during that communication. So we're going to talk about attending skills, which are incredibly important, and then solution focused questions and curiosity questions. So these are particular ways that we're going to make statements to people or have questions to people that are going to allow that person to feel empowered and to take responsibility for the correction, right? We don't want them leaving without ownership of taking that, of changing the behavior or changing whatever needs to be done. And then stage 3 of the workshop, we're talking about reflective listening. So when that person gives us feedback back, or when that person says something to us, how do we respond to them in a way that they feel acknowledged, that they feel heard? That's super important. And then obtaining agreement, and then deciding on follow-up. So those are very crucial. So we want that person to take ownership, but we also want to have a follow-up with it, because obviously one of the mistakes that we had earlier was the fact that nobody follows up to make sure that it actually did change. And then stage 4 is basically putting it all together and the do's and don'ts. And then we'll also cover things like doing things like email and online kind of stuff, as far as corrective feedback goes, if that's ever a requirement. So that's our feedback, corrective feedback workshop that we have coming up. And so we're just taking expressions of interest right now. If anybody is interested in that, it would be great for you to just reach out on that. Now, another program that Neil and I have coming up is our 6-month leadership coaching program. And this coaching program is going to go through 6 different modules, obviously 6 months, 6 different modules. So we talk about communication, but it's going to be actually quite a bit bigger. So this is a lot of advanced communication skills. We are also then going to talk about giving praise and how to give praise correctly. We want to be able to give praise to people, especially people who don't accept praise very well. We want to be able to give praise in a way that they will accept, and that's super important. We also will be talking, obviously, about corrective feedback, because that's a very important part of leadership. And then delegation, and how to delegate in a way that empowers and people take ownership. And then we're going to then also talk about that empowerment function and making sure that you are building skill development within your teams. And then goal setting, not only for yourself and the organization, but also for your team. So the 6-month leadership coaching program is a small group course. So it has a maximum of 10 people in each group. The coaching starts, we're starting in March 11th and 25th, and we're doing 2 coaching sessions per month. One will be primarily skill-based development, and then one will be practice development. Each of our sessions are recorded for everybody's use, and will be basically kept in a library for each of the participants. And then we'll also have live events to be able to bring all of our participants together. And we obviously will be available, both myself and Neil, for you throughout courses, by email and text and group chat. And then we also have some ongoing opportunities for people within our 6-month leadership program group. It would be great if anybody has any questions right now. If I could field questions through you. I believe everybody is on mute. So if you do have a question about giving feedback, or how to overcome stress, or the physiological sigh, or anything else, that would be a really great time for you to pop that question up, and you can unmute yourself if you want to, or you can just pop it in the chat if you like. All right. Doesn't look like we have any questions, so Neil, I'll pass it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lindley, and thanks everybody for attending. So there's a lot there to digest. I know with the work that Lindley's done with a number of people in law firms, that she's got some really great results from working through a lot of these processes. So it's really important that those processes and the way that Lindley conducts that are followed. Just a little bit about the Management Mentors. We're a small company with some very specialist skills. Lily is obviously, you've seen, has a very strong background in human development, human coaching, and she, as I said, she's had some great successes. My background is in the legal management side, especially growing businesses, and also getting some resolution around partnership areas, and also with senior partners that need to look to their future in a different way, shall we say. So anyhow, with that, thank you all for being here. And if there are any further questions after this, then please email us and we'll go from there. All right. So thank you, everybody, for attending.
Bye. Have a great day.